So everyone, you know I love to talk about a movie. Let's talk about a movie because I'm telling you, this movie may be one of the best movies I've ever seen, ever, that captures the subtlety of vulnerable narcissistic patterns. And I actually think it sheds a lot of light on why trauma bonding and the confusion and the rationalizations of these relationships when people are in vulnerable narcissistic relationships can be so difficult to break out of, okay? I'm going to do my best to dance around the spoilers here because I bet a lot of you haven't watched it. I really hope you do, though. This film had two of my favorite actors in it, Jesse Eisenberg and Kieran Culkin. And Kieran Culkin, honestly, I think he's one of the best of his generation. He was spectacular in Succession. He was spectacular in this. The basic premise of this film is that these two men are cousins, but they were raised closely in childhood, almost like brothers. Their grandmother died, who they really loved, and she left them a little bit of money to go see the town in Poland where she was from. So the two cousins meet up in the airport and they go as part of a small tour group. And the tour group is sort of focused on the vibrancy of Poland and the importance of the Jewish community in Poland before World War II and the Holocaust, right? Now, the two cousins have not seen each other in a long time. They don't live far away from each other, but they haven't seen each other. They meet up at the airport, and one of the cousins, the one played by Jesse Eisenberg, is tightly wound and very compulsive about details and nervous and overprepared. And the other one, played by Kieran Culkin, is more disinhibited. And from the very beginning of the film, you can see he's going to be a real handful. And in fact, the film is called A Real Pain. So Culkin plays a character called Benji. Okay, Benji's the vulnerable narcissistic character. Best, again, most beautifully nuanced portrayal I've ever seen. Benji comes off as charming and charismatic, but then at times he's very dysregulated and abrupt. He's impulsive, and sometimes he struggles with managing all kinds of emotions. For example, he sometimes even just bursts into tears whenever he feels his emotions, and it's clear even at those times he's sad. It takes a minute to see this vulnerable narcissism. Benji is clearly depressed and has existential issues, and he's struggling with really complicated grief after the loss of this beloved grandmother. As the film goes on, there's other things we learn about Benji's mental health. Again, I don't want to spoil some of these things, so watch the film. And all of this show us that what's happening with Benji isn't as simple as just personality stuff, but it's also not as simple as depression. And some of you in relationships with vulnerable narcissistic people may have wondered, is this depression? What is this? Now, people like this character Benji. He has just enough of a charming, grandiose presentation and extroversion to make him want to engage with other people, and other people are engaged by him. They open up to him. They laugh and enjoy, mostly, his shenanigans. He does quirky things that make moments memorable. He draws people out of their shells with sort of unexpected, abrupt questions. And even when he is even being quite unempathically unkind to the tour guide, he still manages to turn those circumstances around. Like I said, super curious about other people, and he learns a lot about other people in a short period of time. Now, some of the guests on the tour, as time goes on, have had it with him. There was one older man on the tour, in the story in particular. And the husband of that couple really views Benji as a pain in the ass and a jerk. But the wife of that couple wonders what suffering made Benji this way. Now, there is a speech that Benji's cousin gives at dinner, which is actually probably one of the best parts of the film. And it's actually it was a perfectly good description of what happens to people who are in relationships with vulnerable narcissistic people. The love, the pity, the guilt, the concerns for their well-being, the frustration and the anger at their behavior, the wanting to get together with them and seeing them, the not wanting to see them because of how they behave. Benji is also having struggles with failure to launch. I think he's living in his mother's basement, he's doing odd jobs, and he's also struggling with his mental health. His cousin, Eisenberg, wants better for him. And you can see that hope that his cousin has, how much shame that evokes in Benji. And the one thing that Benji's character interestingly doesn't do is get ostensibly angry. Rather, he becomes quite sad. And I was really happy to see the film capture that dynamic, because while the anger response to shame in narcissistic people is so common, this sort of sad response to shame is also seen in vulnerable narcissism. And this means that people around that vulnerable narcissist may feel that they have to walk on eggshells when they want to help them because they're afraid of making the vulnerable narcissistic person even more sad by evoking more shame, if that makes sense. Now, with Benji, we definitely see some entitlement. He doesn't always, for example, get to places on time, which slows down the entire tour group and inconveniences the people in the group. But his creativity also leads to really special moments for the tour group. He wanted, for example, to be able to smoke weed in Poland, so he just brings it. He doesn't feel that the rules are there for him, and he's very charming to the TSA people. And while his cousin is sweating it out, Benji tends to walk around at times like the world is his oyster. But this complicated, nuanced mess of Benji, sad, impulsive, demanding, frustrating, dysregulated, and sometimes even abrupt and almost unempathic, also charming, charismatic, captured the many facets of vulnerable narcissism. It's so hard to portray this, but they did it. They got it. And the actor, Culkin, he hit it out of the park. But the other spectacular thing to witness is the impact that Benji's behavior has on his cousin. The cousin is obsessive, anxious, plays by the book, follows the rules, socially anxious, and tightly wound. He worries a lot about Benji. He's hurt by him. He's hurt by how Benji has so little interest in his life, but he shares this beautiful childhood and these wonderful memories with him. The cousin wants to help Benji be better. He sees potential in him, but has also felt mocked and minimized by him and has felt his life has been viewed with contempt. Now, the cousin, Eisenberg's job is in digital ad sales, and Benji makes several scathing attacks at him about his job. The most special scene of the film to me, though, at least, was when the cousin, Eisenberg, is once again making apologies for his cousin and also sharing some elements of his past, things that had happened to him, and laying all that makes his relationship out with his cousin so complicated that he loves him, but he just doesn't know what to do with him. He loves him, and he doesn't know what to do with him. Think of how much that applies to so many of you. Now, interestingly, despite how badly Benji behaved, even the people he insulted came around and at the end of the tour told him how much they would miss him and thanked him for his frank, though abrupt, critiques and advice. I mean, that begs the question, were they enablers? Who knows? I mean, they really weren't trauma bonded because they didn't really know him, but it was interesting how much he was able to get away with. But ultimately, that sense of, in your heart, or your mind, or your life, of just not knowing what to do with or about a complicatedly vulnerable narcissistic person, that's what this film is about. You got to see it because the last scene of the film was simply perfect. It was the best last scene I'd ever seen in a film. I have no idea whether the filmmaker or filmmakers who made this film knew what narcissism was when they made the film, or if he would even agree with my characterization that that's what this film is about. Because day after day, I hear from people who have such a complicated stew of feelings about the narcissistic people in their lives, especially if they are vulnerable narcissistic people. The movies we see are often about grandiose, psychopathic, manipulative, larger-than-life folks. But we don't get to see the nuanced depiction that shows us why it is so difficult to choose whether to leave or stay. So we're always in purgatory in these relationships. You have the fun moments or even the moments of envy for how the narcissistic person moves through the world, and then moments of embarrassment or shame at how they are behaving. And it wasn't lost on me that the cousin character who had such a brotherly relationship with Benji did go through life in such an anxious and hyper emotionally controlled way. Because what can often happen is that we try to bring order into the chaos caused by these relationships. And many, many folks will reflect on becoming quite compulsive as a result of being in a narcissistic relationship. And perhaps doing that, becoming very ordered and compulsive, gives yourself at least one place in your life where there's predictability. While the internet keeps trying to simplify narcissistic relationship advice into just saying, hey, in a relationship with someone who's narcissistic, well, you have to leave or go no contact, when it's actually a lot more subtle. And it's why so many people say, this relationship hurts me, but it's not simple. They do awful things, but I can also see their struggle. I hate how they go through the world and the things they do and say, but I also get the appeal. I like them, but I also don't like them. You're watching this video and saying, well, isn't that just the trauma bond? Not necessarily. Because once you see it clearly, you see how spectacularly flawed the narcissistic person is. But at the same time, you see the shiny, compelling moments. And then again, can see the elements of their behavior that are not acceptable. And this next part is the clincher. And you learn to stop blaming yourself. Then you may stay in the relationship, but not be as surprised by their behavior. You may leave the relationship, but still have some concern for them. But you no longer wonder if you're enough. And you're able to see the nuanced nature of this person who is not healthy for you. That's not a trauma bond. That's wisdom. And heaven knows you need a hell of a lot of it to navigate these relationships. But this movie, A Real Pain, check it out. That was my take. It took me by surprise. Not everyone who watches it will agree. But I got to tell you, I love me some movies, and this is the best one I've seen in a long time and the best I've ever seen in terms of depicting a vulnerable narcissistic person. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks again.